when I was a kid. I lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and I spent a lot of time at the Cleveland Museum of Art, not only looking at art, but also they offered classes for children and teens there, and I took advantage of that a great deal. I taught at Hanover High School for 20 years, and art teachers are generalists. You know, that gave me the opportunity to explore a lot of different media, and in using encaustic, my encaustics are mixed media, so that gives me the chance to use a lot of what I learned. So I first came into contact with encaustics in 2007. I was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I was laundering down the hallway while my family waited in the atrium. I was actually looking for a bathroom, and I went by this display of what are called the Fayum mummy portraits, and I'm going to show you an example of one. So this is one of what I saw. There were several of them, and they were so luminous and so beautiful that I decided that I really needed to learn how to paint with encaustics. So what encaustic is pigmented waxes, and I'll get to the mechanics of that in just a minute. And you have to use the waxes in molten form. So, encaustic started in ancient Greece. You've probably all seen pictures of Greek ships where they have, like the eyes painted on the fronts of them. And that started because the Greeks used beeswax to waterproof their ships. And then they started putting pigments in with the beeswax and started decorating. So then there was a group of Greeks and Romans who went to ancient Egypt, and they adopted the Egyptian funerary customs, but they brought along this painting technique. And so they started doing mummy portraits, like I just showed you, to affix to the top of the mummy cases. Okay, so these were encaustics, and they've lasted thousands of years. They were discovered in a tomb in the 1800s, and they were in perfect condition. So it's pretty amazing how durable they are, even though they're wax. I wouldn't leave them on the dashboard of your car in the summer heat, but in general, they're pretty durable. Okay, so encaustics were used for a long time. If you think of the Greek sculptures that we see in museums today, the ones that are white marble, those were also originally painted with encaustics, and that was called polychrome. And they were actually quite garish. They were, all these bright colors. They looked sort of like, carousel animals. So that was encaustic also. And in those days, I can't imagine how incredibly difficult it must have been to paint with encaustics then, because the waxes had to be heated on a brazier. The tools that they used to apply things with were heated on braziers, and I have no idea how they did what's called fusing the pieces, which is what you do with heat in order to attach one layer to another. Okay, so encaustic sort of fell out of favor for a long time. It was revived a little bit in the modern era. The most famous early modern practitioner of encaustics was Jasper Johns. And I bet a lot of you are familiar with this painting. This is his flag painting, and Jasper Johns actually really liked encaustics for the same reason I do, which is that you can use collage materials with it, you can build up texture, you can create areas that are opaque or translucent. So I read that when he was first starting to use encaustics, there was no nice setups like I have here, and that he would use a hot plate attached to a broomstick to heat his materials. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyhow, it's a good story. So encaustics, working with encaustics is all about heat control. All right, you have to be careful of a few things. You have to have good ventilation, so we have an exhaust fan set up here. Encaustics are not carcinogenic, but they do release some fumes into the air, and if you're sensitive to them, you can get your respiratory system or your eyes irritated. So you want to be careful about that. I have two what we call hot pallets here. This is an extremely expensive milled aluminum one that's, really fabulous. And here's one that works pretty much as well, and it's a thrift store pancake griddle. So, if you're thinking of starting out, then, pancake griddle is great. I used pancake griddles for years before I actually got a gift certificate to an art supply store and decided to buy one of these. So there's two main things that you use as a medium when you're doing encaustics. This is called encaustic. You can't really see it. Maybe after I'm done talking, you can come up and take a look at my setup a little bit.
Say that again. It's called encaustic what?
Encaustic medium, and it's a mixture of beeswax and damar resin. So beeswax gives you the stickiness and the transparency, and the damar resin makes things a little bit harder, so that the glue is more durable. It also makes the wax clearer. And then this is soy wax. Okay, and soy wax is what I use to clean my brushes. Although in general, I try not to clean my brushes. Anybody who's an artist knows that cleaning brushes is a big pain. So what I tend to do is just leave my brushes on my hot palette, and I have one brush for each color, and then I just turn it off when I'm done working, and wax hardens, the brush stays there, and then I use the same brush the next time I'm using it. Over time, I use up all my brushes, and then I do have to clean them eventually, but, not all the time. So I have all my little tins labeled here, and I have clothespins on them, because one of the things you have to be careful of when you're looking at encaustics is you don't want to burn yourself, right? So this way I can move things around on my tray, and I don't have to worry about burning myself. And also, the cleaning wax and the medium look very similar, so you don't want to mix those two things up.
Before you go further, you're saying the soy wax is your cleaning medium. Is it a wax too?
Yeah, but for some reason, soy wax will take the color out of your brushes,
okay.
but it also allows the brushes to stay soft. When I first started using encaustics, people would use paraffin to clean their brushes, but that's a petroleum product, and it's not a renewable resource. So now that it's available, I've pretty much changed over to soy wax. You can do a lot of cleaning just by melting stuff. So I have a lot of tools. Rather than using cleaning medium on them at all, I just take them and I heat them up on my palette, and then I can just wipe off the mold and wax. So I try to use as little cleaning materials as possible. So to start with, you need to use something that's rigid and absorbent. And I like to use what are called cradle panels. They're nice and stiff, and also they're pretty easy to frame. So you can see they all already have an edge. And this is one that's prepared. It's called encaustic board. And it already has an encaustic gesso on it. For those of you who are like acrylic painters, handmade paper, and this already has some texture, and I came into a trove of handmade papers because I had a studio across from a woman who also had a studio who got divorced from a paper maker, and she got a lot of paper. So she said, well, I'll sell you a bunch of paper, but only if you buy this much. So I still have, it's been years ago, I still have tons of handmade paper, so that's good for me. And you can also paint directly on wood panel, so sometimes I do that.
Excuse me, Stephanie?
Yeah.
You said it needs to be absorbent.
Right.
So why would a wood panel be absorbent, but the thing covered with?
Oh, the gesso? Acrylic gesso is just, it's a more solid type of surface. I don't know what else to tell you. But why did you paint an encaustic on? Okay.
I took a class from Stephanie once, but that doesn't mean you remember everything. Like, I'm learning a lot today. So, like that, this absorbent part.
Yeah, well, wood is absorbent. Different kinds of wood are more absorbent than others. The cheap panels that just have, pine on work really well. Some people do paint on paper, but then it's good to mount it on something that's rigid. Or they come out with this new type of material called Encaustic, which is supposedly a fabric that you can use encaustic paints on and they won't chip off. But I haven't experimented much with that. So these are some of the waxes that I use. I have a ton, and they come in all these great colors. Some people do make their own waxes, and you can mix your encaustic medium with any sort of dry pigment, and some people mix it with oil paints, but then if you're not really careful, the results may not be so stable. So I just like to.
So that's a powder right there?
What's that?
The thing in your hand is a powder?
No, it's pigment mixed with medium.
Oh, so that's a waxy substance.
It's a waxy block.
Got it.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. So I talked about my two palettes. There's a very narrow temperature range that you can use encaustics at. The encaustics will melt starting at about 170, but you don't want to go over 200 degrees because that's when they start really releasing those volatile fumes that you don't want to be breathing in. So between 180 and 190 is where you really want to have your temperature, and I'm not going to pick it up because it's hot, but I have a thermometer on each of my palettes to make sure that I stay within that temperature range. And if you do get your own pancake griddle or palette, you want to make sure that you have a thermometer as well, because these things are notoriously inaccurate. You can set something at 200 degrees and, it won't be anything right there. So, because I use my equipment all the time, I have some little marks so I can line things up. And actually, when I'm in my studio, I never change my heat settings at all. I just, turn off my search bar, and then I don't have to mess with them. So one of the great things about encaustics is that you can not only put things on, but you can also scrape things away. So I use brushes to apply my wax, and then I also have a ton of tools. I have pottery tools. I have, I think this is a wheel that dressmakers use to, decide where to, they make little holes and use a pounce to have chalk go through the holes. I have, like dental tools, anything, forks, anything that you can use to make a mark just remove it or paint over it. I use foils and metal leaf because of the nature of the wax. You know, you can collage a lot of things in. I already mentioned handmade papers. I use fibers. This is actually something, this is called Angelina, and it's a heat-sensitive fiber that people who do needle felting actually use. I use these kind of metallic foils. I love all of the shiny stuff. It's really fun. Okay, so I have any questions about all of this?
Well, are just any glitter too?
Any what?
Would any kind of glitter do for the...
Sure. You could use, I didn't bring everything that I use, but I do use mica powders, which are, you know, sort of like very fine metallic. They're sort of like hand pastels, only they're metallic. I use them as well, and yeah, you can see some of the shiny stuff that I used in this one. So the way I start, some people like to have their paintings go around their cradle panel. I like to start by putting some blue tape around the edge. I like a nice crisp edge. And so I'm gonna do some work on, I think I'll work on this, which one should I work on? I guess I'll work on this one.
Before you go on with that, most of your work are landscapes.
Yeah.
Do you work in other formats too?
Well, I do. You know, I do portraits, and I do some landscapes with people in them. But yeah, this show is focusing on one particular aspect of my work.
Okay.
So, as I said earlier, working with encaustics is all about heat control. So a lot of people who do encaustics like to have a really smooth, shiny surface. And if that's the case, then you want to make sure that everything that you're working with is warm. I like to have texture, so I do not always do that. And as soon as I lift my brush up, the encaustic paint that's on it will start drying. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to keep my panel and put an underlayer of plain medium on my panel. Okay, so this is going to be a little noisy, so I'm not going to talk while I do this. And I have a variable speed, variable flow heat gun, and that way I can, you know, use different levels of heat depending on what I'm doing. So I'm gonna heat this first, just warm it up a little. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on my first layer of medium. Okay, and so I'm going to hold this over my panel. And these brushes that I'm using here for applying medium they're Japanese brushes, and they're called hake brushes. And they're very smooth. It's spelled H-A-K-E. And this will give a foundation for what goes on top. And you see I'm holding this at a slight tilt so that the hot wax doesn't fall on my hand and I don't burn myself.
If it falls on your hot plate, then you've got to clear it off.
Depends how neat you are.
All right.
Okay, so you can see, I don't know if you can see, but I have some ridges in some areas where it's not nice and smooth, so I'm going to smooth that out. And this is called fusing. Here, I better stop this while I talk. some people like to use their fusing as an artistic element, actually, and I do that sometimes with skies. You know your basic painting, and then you can melt your white clouds and your blue sky background together, and you get some really nice effects. It also works really well for water. Okay, so I'm just gonna fuse this, and what I'm looking for is for the wax to just start to get shiny. I don't want it to be moving around or melting. I'm going to take some handmade papers and I'm going to put them on my panel, and I'm going to incorporate them into my piece. And after I'm all done, I will trim the edges.
Turning that off, except for that little strip down the middle, there wasn't a need for medium. You could have just glued that paper.
I could,
Right.
but it would be waiting a long time if I.
And that little piece down the middle probably has something magical with it, so that's fine.
I'm going to cover it up.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put medium on top of this in order to help it stick the layer below. And medium will also change the color slightly. Then I'm going to use my wax paper. Wax paper is a very handy material. And I'm going to press it down so that, although you're right, you can just glue the paper directly to the panel. You can also use the wax as a way to attach material. Okay, so now I have what's essentially an underpaint. Right? And I'm going to fuse this again. This has to be done between every single layer. The warmer your piece is, the lighter the fusing can be. So, for example, if I come in the morning and I haven't worked on anything since yesterday, my piece will be quite cold, and I'll need to warm it up before I work on it again. But if I'm working on something, this one is quite warm, I can fuse it really lightly because the warmth that's already residual there will keep things together. So I'm going to turn my heat down a little bit.
Do you have a temperature setting?
Yes.
Okay.
This has both temperature setting and also I can control the airflow.
Got it.
Because people always ask, can you use a hair dryer? No, because the airflow is too intense. Okay, so now I'm going to start painting with my to tone it down some. And, I have my favorite colors. You can tell I got this big blonde because I really like this blue. But these waxes are incredibly expensive. These little tiny ones, they're like $8 or $10 a piece. These medium-sized ones are closer to 20 or 30, and this one is 80, I think. So just the materials themselves are quite expensive. I also like to use my paints in a way where they're more transparent. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my mediums and I'm going to mix that in. Oh, and also one thing I didn't mention, this is, when I'm at home I use a level to make sure that everything is perfectly level. But I didn't do that here. You can see, okay, twice all my very expensive waxes going down the drain here. So then I can, paint.
So you're covering up whatever picture was on that paper.
I am.
You're just using the paper for texture.
For texture and also so that things can show through it. Okay, so I'm going to leave this one right here. If I take my brushes off, they cool down, and I have to warm them up again before I can use them. They'll become stiff. So it's just easier to leave the brushes right there. Okay, and then maybe, let's see what else. This is a very kind of transparent, cloudy color. So for big colors, I melt my different colors in these tints. And that way it doesn't matter so much on a small piece like this, but when I'm doing something large, I end up using a lot of wax. You want to make sure that your paint stays the same color throughout the whole painting. So then I use tins or little pans to melt my waxes. So I'm gonna use this again.
While you're using it, several of your paintings do have a nice light blue background that is translucent. That thing, holy cow, that's such a nice color.
It is a nice color.
Yeah.
So, I don't like what's happening here. So I can take one of my pottery tools and I can just scrape off what I don't like. Take that thing off here too. And then, because this stuff is so expensive, I have, where's my scrap? Oh, I didn't bring it. Okay. I have a container that's labeled scrap, and everything that I scrape off goes in there, and then I can, eventually, when all these different colors mix together, it becomes a kind of very nice neutral gray or brown that I can use. So at this point, this is actually quite warm, okay? So I can do a couple of things. I can wait for it to cool down before I do a next step, because one thing that I like to do is draw back into my pieces with wax crayons, and I also use oil pastels.
Oil pastels?
Yep.
Yep.
So I like consistency that you need. I mean, you can use them, but they'll just be kind of washed out and not, yeah, wicked, exactly. So, I wouldn't. So, I'm gonna pull this out. All right, so this piece has hardened up quite a bit, and so, oops, knock that over. Yeah, the brushes so that yeah, thank you. I'll try and hold stuff up. So I also use pencils. You know, let's say maybe I wanted to have a few more little trees. Coming up in the middle here, give a little more texture to this piece. And I can get detail with the drawing that is really hard for me to get with the paintbrushes. So once I've drawn something in, then again I need to fuse it in order to incorporate the part that I just drew. The wax will kind of float up and encapsulate that piece, the drawn parts, and then they'll become a part of the surface of the painting.
If you were willing to be patient, could you use just oil paints, let them dry for a day, and then encapsulate those?
Well, that's a topic of debate, okay? Because you can use what are called, they call them pigment sticks, and they're basically oil paints that are mixed with wax and they stick. And the general consensus is that you should only use that on top of your pieces, that if you use it and then you put a layer of wax over it, it won't dry properly, and then you won't have a stable painting and it'll degrade over time.
But the paintings in this gallery, did you do those with brushes, with just colors of hot wax?
Well, yes, and also, you know, pencils and, yes.
Okay, fine.
I use the techniques I'm showing you here, and also, you know, digging stuff away, okay? Like, in the one behind you, there's some bare spots, and I did that by, you know,
I see, okay.
removing things. If you come up and look at this one later, you'll see that there's areas where I use some of my sharp tools to get the effects of, you know, to remove a top layer and show the layer below so that it has an effect of grasses or shrubs. And then some of the other things that I use are like these, the foliage in here is done with the dry brush technique. So, you know, I have my paint, and then I remove a lot of it, and then because it's dry, it gives you a very, you know, leaf-like effect rather than putting on a solid layer.
But you were brushing it against a layer that was mostly cold or hot?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Because if you use drier paint on a colder surface, you're going to get more texture. Okay, so I sometimes use foils in my pieces, and there's a couple ways I use that. These are actually not designed for encaustic, but they work. They're called right whatever color you're using. And you'll see I use this technique quite a bit. And I don't like all of that, so I'm going to remove some of it. And then this is my favorite type of foil to use because these are all candy wrappers. So I get to eat the candies and then use the colored foils. And in my first studio, there was a little arts and crafts shop below my studio, and they carried Green Mountain candy. So that was really great. I ran out of foil. Well, I gotta go down and eat some more candy so I can have some more foil. So these, I can stick stuff. I heat up my area. And then I'm using this again in a minute. And then I press my foil down. And then just lightly put some medium on it. And sometimes when you're doing things like that, an edge will come up. And that's when the wax paper comes in handy. You can use wax paper to rub down and attach anything. And I might do some of these Angelina fibers, which I really love. Let's see what color should I use here. And it's the same thing there. I'm going to just stick some down. And they stick loosely.
So I didn't see you use scissors or the Angelina fibers. Do they just pull apart, break off?
Yeah, I mean you can use scissors, but
Okay.
and I'm gonna use my wax paper to burnish those around as well. So that's coming along. I think I might, do something more down here, maybe put in some green. I'm not sure about that mountain in the background. But anyhow, I start out with an idea in mind, but then things transform as they go along. So if you're an artist who likes process, which I do, I've always liked, you do something, then you do something else, then you do something else. So this is the perfect medium for me. So let's see, what else? So maybe I'll make this sky a little more sky on this one. And you can see where there's some texture. You get some really nice effects just from putting the paint over areas that are not perfectly flat. I'll show you what happens when you use your heat gun as an artistic tool, as well as just for fusing. And some people, I have a torch too. A lot of people like using torches. The thing about torches is that you have to be very careful. When my first class that I took in Encaustic, I took at the Penland School of And I was doing a mixed media piece where I incorporated wood shavings, and I didn't really think about what might happen when you were using leftover materials, wax, and a torch. And I set the thing on fire. Good thing there was a fire extinguisher close by. But so if you're using a torch, you have to be careful. And also, some people say that torches tend to release more of those volatile elements into the atmosphere, so that using a heat gun is safer because it doesn't get quite so hot. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this up a little. Is I can move the wax. I don't know if you can see this. I can't really hold it up. I can move the wax with my torch and with my heat gun. And it's quite liquid right now, so I'm going to wait a second for it to cool down. But then you can get some really interesting cloud formations just from using the heat gun to actually melt and combine the wax rather than just using it to fuse the work that you've already done. So then I might want to put some trees on here. So this wax I'm not adding any medium to. I'm just going to use it straight so that it's opaque. Build up my painting until I have something that I'm happy with. So that tells you about the, the basics of how I use Encaustics. Do you have any questions? No?
Well, yeah, I was a little curious about green is kind of a difficult color to make right where a tone you want, where you shade you want. So what did you just use? Did you use black? What was your...
For the green?
Just now to make the green.
Yeah, you use two waxes. Which two really?
To make, I use two waxes to make the brown for the tree. For the branches, I use burnt umber and green earth. But I know what waxes I like to use to, make particular colors. So that just comes from having used them. I think anybody who's a painter, gets to know their paints and what combinations they like. What I don't like to use is just, use them straight. Because particularly in nature, I find that those colors are really unsubtle. And some people make beautiful bright landscapes, but using bright colors, but that doesn't work for me so much. Anything else?
Okay, so like at the end, is there anything you have to do to just kind of finish it? Or are these paintings on the walls finished the same way that one there?
They're finished. What you can do actually is once they're done is, and I'm not going to do that with these because their surface is still quite soft, but you let them sit for a couple of days, and then you can polish them with a soft cotton cloth, and if you have a very smooth surface, that will give them the sheen that encaustics often have. You can also cover them with this stuff called Dorland's wax. I mean, people use it as a furniture wax, and that will give you a completely consistent surface.
What was the name of that?
It's called Dorland's, D-O-R-L-A-N-D apostrophe S. But I don't particularly care for that. And something that's like really, really smooth, you know. Occasionally what happens over time is that encaustics will get cloudy because of their exposure to moisture or whatever, and you can either use your cloth or you can actually just use the palm of your hand and polish them, and that will make them shiny and clear again. Although, like I said, they are remarkably durable. And this one, I don't really have time to show you this technique, but this shows another technique. So what I do with this is I carved away lines in the background, and then I fill it with molten encaustic, and then I take a scraper and I scrape off the top so that you get that nice sharp edge. So that's another way that you can get some, you know, really precise lines besides drawing. Anything else? Well, thank you all